Hello class, today we are going to cover chapter 5. Our learning objectives are that by the end, you should be able to explain the historical importance of delinquency prevention programs and summarize their effectiveness. You should be able to summarize the various components of the Alternative Prevention Paradigm Project, summarize environmental and institutional prevention programs, and describe the role of diversion. So let's start out by talking about delinquency prevention. Prevention attempts to thwart youth's illegal behavior before it begins. So primary prevention efforts are things like modifying conditions in the physical and social environment, while you have secondary prevention, which is really an early identification and intervention in the lives of people who have criminogenic circumstances. So individuals who come from maybe lower socioeconomic areas or areas that are known for more violence, gang activity, trying to get some prevention programs in there for those specific individuals because we've identified that they have circumstances that may lead to criminal offending. And then tertiary prevention really just attempts to prevent recidivism. So it attempts to prevent people from reoffending. So considering the history of delinquency prevention efforts, we've been trying to prevent youth crime for years, but unfortunately with very little success. So most recent programs are focusing on preventing violence and drug use, and they're showing more promising results. But the question is, could the issue just simply be that delinquency is part of growing up, and there's really just no way to truly prevent it from happening at all? So they offer little effectiveness. Others would argue that prevention efforts actually widen the net of individuals that then become involved in the juvenile justice system, because a lot of times these prevention programs, sometimes they're community-based, but there's other times where these prevention efforts are also part of the juvenile system, and it sort of just then widens the net of individuals that are coming into contact with the system. And they're expensive. Programming is not cheap, so we want to make sure that what we're doing is actually working. When we talk about then violent juvenile and delinquency prevention, we want to use a majority of our prevention and diversion programs for youth that we know are violent and high-risk individuals. Those who are low risk will tend to self-correct. So high-risk offenders we know actually tend to commit 75% of all juvenile offenses. So it's not that we have this plethora of offenders, we have a small group that commits the majority of offending. What it requires is a strong collaboration between agencies to have a very comprehensive approach. So you need to have things like accountability, you have to have sanctions, intensive treatment, and even rehabilitative services. So you're addressing the juvenile from many different facets to prevent them from engaging in future violent, high-risky behaviors. They should also address key areas of risk. So what those criminogenic risk factors are, which factors are most contributing to their involvement? Is it their antisocial peers? Do they always seem to get arrested when they're with their friends? Or is it their antisocial, let's say, behaviors? Are they a very violent individual? Do they tend to get into a lot of fights? They have a lot of angry outbursts. They don't know how to control that. We need to strengthen personal and institutional factors, but also provide adequate supervision and support. We need to make sure that we are supervising individuals at a high enough level that there's really someone on them at all times. So they should be intense and have multiple contacts per week or even daily contact. We need to make sure that we're building on the youth's strengths. The other factor to consider here is offering long-term stays for youth in the community. We really don't want to place youth if we do not have to out of the home. The idea is to keep them in the home because they're eventually going to return to that home. So we want to make sure that we can give them all of the treatment and rehabilitation and really skill sets that they need to be successful in that community. Because youth will do very well in placement facilities almost always. They'll do very well, they'll abide by the rules, but they have 24/7 supervision. They have plenty of support while they're there. Everything is so structured that it's just not really mirroring what they're going to get when they come back into their communities. So wilderness programs are one type of program. They're also called survival programs, where a youth can build their strength and self-reliance through seemingly, or what might seem to them, impossible tasks. You know, hiking on long journeys, maybe climbing up walls that are pretty high. So they're really these survival programs that build their strengths. It gives experiences to youth who may not otherwise be exposed to things like this. So especially for youth in inner cities, there's a program called Diacon Wilderness Program around here, and they really just take youth in and give them all of these outdoor experiences that they would not have from an inner city to open their minds up. There's a program called Outward Bound, which do things like mountain walking, backpacking, camping, even rock climbing, and different, again, survival type skills. Teaching them how to make a fire, how to cook over the fire, how to break that down. And these programs can be community or residential based. So it can be something such as, so Outside In is a program which is residential in Pennsylvania. And youth will stay there, they live there, and then they also do these wilderness programs during the day. Or the Diacon one I mentioned, they have a weekend program. So youth stay at home. This is going to be more community based then, because they stay at home during the week and just on the weekends go to this program. What are some of the alternative prevention efforts that we look at? Well, positive youth development is one, and within this, resilience is really a key factor, as well as addressing the whole youth. So positive youth development really focuses on enhancing the individual and community capacities. So youth choose which programs they're going to participate in as part of that development and that individual choice. It attempts to break down stereotypes and really build bridges between community-based organizations. But what's important is that the activities have to be one that transforms the juvenile's actual environment, and it has to change the way they're living. You have to have opportunities to learn, but also to have fun and to serve the community. And they need to provide knowledge and skills that can be converted into meaningful lifelong employment. And then integrating as many core elements of these elements as possible into every activity. So it's really taking a look at all of these different factors that can influence a juvenile and their likelihood of engaging in delinquency, and making sure that, again, it's really important here that while youth are learning, that they're also having fun, because no one learns when they're miserable and bored, especially kids. And it's important that it's serving the community, that it's giving back, it's being preventative in that way. We talk about family and school programs. We have things like parental training, which actually teach parents social learning techniques so they can help shape their children's behaviors. Or they'll focus on improving parental control and monitoring, and just really improving that quality of the relationship that the parent has with the child. We also have family-based interventions, which really just involves the child and the parent learning how to work together to overcome the juvenile's behaviors that they're exhibiting. And school programs can include things like alternative schools, mentoring programs, or even classroom engagement, even having community awareness and drug and alcohol education, or truancy prevention. So there's a lot of different programs and a lot of different settings that are available to youth. Now, diversion is a little bit different than prevention. So diversion is actually trying to keep juveniles out of formal court processing. So justice subsystems typically retain control over these diverted youth, because if they violate, then we can just take them right back into court and address the concerns. So a lot of the diversion programs are actually underneath or within the juvenile justice system. So a lot of them are voluntary participation. The youth has to agree to the diversion program to be placed into it. Otherwise, most likely the juvenile will just be placed on supervision. So youth courts are one where youth are sentenced by a jury of their peers, and this is typically for first-time offenders, those between the ages of 11 to 17 who are accused of misdemeanor nonviolent offenses. So community service is really a common disposition that they're given, and some common charges that you see are things like theft, maybe low-level assaults or disorderly conduct, and possession of alcohol. You also have juvenile drug courts and mental health courts, which are just a collaboration between the judge, prosecution, defense, the juvenile, and service providers, and they're really cost effective. These juvenile courts really they just sort of encompass the whole juvenile all the way around with this collaborative approach where all of these key actors are playing a very active role. So they may have weekly like court meetings, which is not a hearing necessarily, but it's a court meeting between all of these individuals to make sure that everyone is on the same page with the person. They know how they're doing. They can share if there's been struggles, and everyone can address it immediately. And drug courts actually have shown to reduce recidivism by roughly 7 to 14%, but even up to and as high as 35%. And then you have mediation programs where all of the involved parties are going to come together to resolve their differences without having court involvement. So a mediator is going to be someone who really runs this session. And this is typically for youth who are maybe 6 to 18 who are accused of status and nonviolent offenses. So they can really bring all of the people together and have a mediation and say what would be the best outcome for this juvenile, and to make, if there's, say, a victim in the case, to make the victim whole. Just talking a little bit more about, specifically about drug courts, and we'll talk about mental health courts and a little bit more about mediations. So drug courts are really this comprehensive focus on the functioning of the juvenile within their family. So again, you're going to see a greater coordination among all of the agencies that are involved, particularly with the judge taking on a more active role in that supervision. Whereas juveniles on regular supervision will come to court every 6 months for a review hearing, and that can be a pretty quick hearing, to be honest, if everything's going well. And it uses increased use of immediate sanctions for noncompliance. So again, if they're having weekly meetings or weekly drug courts where the juveniles come in and all parties are present, you can address that non-compliance right then and there and ensure there's sort of swift sanctions being put in place. Some of the goals of drug courts are to provide immediate intervention treatment and structured monitoring, to improve the juvenile's functioning, to address problems specifically related to their drug use, and to provide youth with the skills that they need in order to lead drug-free lives. But at the same time, making sure that we're holding them accountable and strengthening that family so the family can ultimately provide the structure and guidance for that youth so they don't have to rely on the courts or on the system to do that for them. Now with mental health courts, it's very similar. You have a lot of cooperation here and collaboration among that multidisciplinary team. And the goals here are really to just decrease recidivism and increase the juvenile's adherence to treatment, whether that treatment is making sure they're going to their counseling sessions or going to therapy or even medication management. We know a lot of people who struggle with mental health issues struggle to stay on their medication regimen once they start to feel like they're getting better, because most times they've been on the medication for a little bit. They feel like they're fixed and they don't need it anymore, not realizing that the medication is really what's keeping them stable at the moment. And then the mediation programs, those mediators that I talked about are really going to determine 3 things. They're going to determine how sincere is the juvenile in their remorse. Are they taking accountability for what they did? Is it a fair and just sentence? And whether the juvenile is going to need any services in place. So again, the juvenile has to admit guilt for mediation programs because we need to know if they're sincere, if they actually know what they did was wrong. With a mediation program, the juvenile does not have the right to witnesses or an attorney present because it's not a hearing. It's just a mediation. It's a meeting. Typically, they're about 90 days in length, not typically anymore. And when we talk about outcomes, those who are successful are ones who will just complete the full program. And unsuccessful is when a juvenile just fails to meet all of the program requirements. Or you can have the case dismissed, where it's dismissed even prior to the disposition or prior to having a mediation here. So in sum, delinquency prevention really attempts to thwart youth behavior before it becomes delinquent. And historically, prevention programs haven't been very successful. Diversion programs are then instead going to aim to keep the youth out of that formal justice system processing, out of formal juvenile court. And positive youth development is one of the promising strategies that we have to prevent delinquency that also focuses on a resilience. And then we know that youth courts, including drug and mental health courts and mediation programs, also show promising outcomes as diversionary programs to formal processing for youth. So this was your Chapter 5 lecture, and I do hope that everyone has a fabulous week.